Everyone to session 5, and I don't think we have any other announcements. It's still another week before we have the break week. That'll be on May 3rd and 4th, or May 3rd and 4th. So yes, well, I'll turn it over to Professor Krishna. I think we're doing chapters 21 through 25.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, the only announcement I have is that next week we'll continue with these chapters and take the next 5 chapters on. I think Prasad will write to you in detail about it. So the chapters which we are going to discuss, I hope you have had the time and leisure to read them and deliberate over them. I will summarize what Krishnaji is trying to say in these chapters, and then we can have questions. The questions, as usual, are put in the chat box, and someone reads them out to me. We found that that system works best instead of direct interaction with the questions. Now, in these chapters, Krishnamurti is trying to say that there are several manifestations of the ego which have become respectable in society and are valued, but behind them all is the same ignorance that the man on the roadside has. Because the ignorance doesn't go away on account of talent, whether it is in music or in art or in science or in religious scriptures and so on. But the society values talent, values achievement, and looks up to these people. So function becomes a way of assuming authority and status in society. But all that is part of the ignorance, both of the ignorance of the public and the ignorance of the people who use this to display their authority and sort of mislead the people, or to get fame and name for themselves, or money and power for themselves. And that's a very diverse group of people, starting with kings and queens, the royalty, with all their pomp and show and dress and parades and all that, which people love to see. But behind all that, those people are as ignorant as the man on the roadside. Because the ignorant man is not the unlearned, but the one who does not know himself. And none of these talents or functions brings self-knowledge or wisdom into consciousness, therefore doesn't transform the consciousness. So their consciousness is as ordinary as that of the ordinary man on the road. But they have sophisticated ways or facade of hiding that ignorance. This includes intellectuals like the scientists, scholars, not all of them, but those who use their scholarship to assume to get authority and power in society. The gurus who claim religious affiliation quote Sanskrit and in the West, Latin, and so on, with lots of rituals and ceremonies and so on, and peculiar dresses which they wear. If you strip them all of this show and look at them, they are as ignorant as the common man. There is this famous statement of Krishnamurti that the ignorant man is not the unlearned, but the one who does not know himself. And the learned man is stupid if he relies on his knowledge to give him understanding of life and of relationships. And one can see that. The university professors, I have been one of them at the Banaras Hindu University. They have everything. They have casteism, they have religious bigotry, they have jealousies, they have ambition, ego, all manifestations like that of the ordinary man. But they can give wonderful lectures, and the world values those lectures, and so on. Now, these sages like the Buddha or Jesus Christ and so on also gave talks. But that's not what is special about them. What was special about them was the consciousness they came upon. It had no violence, no disorder in their consciousness, no jealousy, no ego, and so on. That was special about the Buddha and Jesus and so on. They were free from attachment to their past and brought some new light. So they had a creative perception. Now we regard artists and poets and scientists as creative when they bring new knowledge into the world. That's a limited form of creativity, which is still relying on the known. And Krishnaji calls that an expression. And that expression is valued greatly by society, because society is looking for entertainment, for enjoyment, and so on. They're not looking for the truth. So these people, the poets, the writers, they are as egoistic as the ordinary man. They're not free from the ego complications in their own life. If you read their biography, including the biography of Einstein, you will see that their knowledge doesn't transform their consciousness. They may speak very noble words, and they are often quoted. But if you look at their life, it is at variance with what they talk. There is an old Persian proverb which comes to my mind, which categorizes human beings into 4 types of people. One who knows not and knows not that he knows not is a fool. Shun him. One who knows not but knows that he knows not is simple. Teach him. One who knows not, one who knows but knows not that he knows is asleep. Wake him. One who knows and knows that he knows is wise. Follow him. But beware of thinking that you belong to that last category, because all the people of the first category who do not know and do not know that they do not know also think that they know. And so one should be skeptical. I don't agree with the last line where the proverb says, follow this wise man. You can't follow, as we have seen in previous lectures, because wisdom is not something you can decide to have. It comes from a lot of self-knowledge, which has to be obtained through your own perceptions and not through books or teachers. So long as the ego is still manifesting, however cleverly hidden behind all these activities of scholarship, of achievements, whether in sports or in art or music, none of these achievements eliminate the ego. In fact, the ego can build on them, and often does. You find that those artists, those poets, have been extremely egoistic in their own personal life. If you read their biographies, you find that. So also the scientists. As I pointed out in the Banaras Hindu University, my direct experience was that the professors had the same kind of jealousies and rivalries and conspiracies for power within the university as politicians do, and so on. So they have a very sophisticated way of hiding their ignorance, but they are as ignorant as the common man. In fact, I found that we were talking about relativity and quantum mechanics and so on in our PhD classes and the master's classes of physics, with students, some of whom were carrying guns or daggers with them. They were at the level of murderers, but they were learning this. This learning doesn't remove the violence in their consciousness. So Krishnaji calls all these manifestations as vulgar. We are dazzled by the outer show. The actors and actresses who perform well look very beautiful, handsome, and so on. The common man is dazzled by all this and thinks that they are a special group of people, very happy, very talented, and so on. All that is just out of ignorance. So he says, how does one prevent the decline in oneself? You can't do that by talent. You cannot do that through your knowledge. The only way is to give your time and attention to understanding yourself. And that self-knowledge is the key to wisdom. And it is wisdom that transforms consciousness. None of those achievements transform consciousness. Though the public regards you as a hero, if you run a little better than everybody else, or you write a poem which delights everybody, there's nothing wrong in doing that. But when it is used as a means to attain name, fame, power, authority in society, then that part is vulgar. That part is the ego. The capacity is not the ego. The capacity is welcome. Different people have different capacities, and those capacities are useful things, wonderful things. But when they are used for the purpose of achieving power and feeling superior to others and so on, they create or sustain the ego in man. And that ego is the seed of destruction in human consciousness, as we have seen repeatedly in the course of these lectures. And none of these, neither the knowledge nor the guru, can help free you of this ego. It is something you have to learn for yourself through your own perceptions, which is why it's called self-knowledge, as distinct from knowledge that you can acquire from another or from a book. It's a completely different dimension. So wisdom is not knowledge. And it is wisdom that destroys ignorance and transforms consciousness. And unless the consciousness is transformed, the rest is all only pomp and show. Whether it's a politician in power, he's president and so on, but you remove his power and look at him as a human being, you'll find that he is extremely ordinary as anybody else, with the same ignorance that is there in everybody else. And that's what it means, that the other man is yourself. He's not really very different from you just because he has more knowledge or more skills, whether at sports or art or music or religion. The religious people included, the so-called religious people with their rituals, their strange dresses, their authority, also are ordinary, because all that activity does not really transform consciousness. And true meaning of religion is to come upon virtue. And virtue is at the level of consciousness, not at the level of actions. You can be vegetarian, and it's a kind thing to be a vegetarian, but you may be a very cruel human being and still be a vegetarian. So it's not vegetarianism per se that is important, but kindness, the feeling of empathy for all living things, that is important. That means the spirit of religion is not the rituals and the methods of religion. It is the feeling of love and compassion, the freedom from conditioning and from ego. That's the spirit of religion. You can practice all the methods of religion. It won't bring you into the spirit without self-knowledge. Similarly, there is the spirit of science and there are the methods of science. People learn the methods, but they often lose sight of the spirit of science. And the spirit is always more important than the method. The same is true of art. The spirit of art is the sense of beauty, which is sensitivity. If you don't have the spirit of beauty, what is it you are trying to express through your art? So the spirit is far more important than the method. And the methods can be taught, but the spirit has to be learned for oneself. You can't learn that from somebody else. You may be inspired by somebody else, but you have to come upon it for yourself. Unless you have that spirit, you are not truly religious or truly democratic or truly a sportsman or a truly a scientist. You have only learned the technique. And when you look at it that way, you will find that the true spirit of all these activities is non-egoistic. It is the ego that destroys that spirit, whether it be in science or in sport or in art, and of course in religion. So the flowering of consciousness requires freedom from the ego, which is freedom from the past, from tradition, from conditioning, and so on. In the last of these 5 chapters, Krishnamurti talks about how one can prevent this decline in oneself, because all of us do happen to have the ego. It gets built in childhood, and you have to learn, you have to unlearn it, sort of. So he asked this question: how does one prevent this decline in oneself? I think it's so important for us to understand Krishnamurti's observations of all this, in which he points out what it is, what is the factor that brings about this decline. But it applies to each one of us, because we also can have this decline in ourselves operating. So I feel that I would like to read with you this chapter. It's not too long. And we need to deliberate together on what he says. He says, there he was, the gray man. He was gray all over, in his walk, in the posture of his body, in the droop of his head. There was something very wrong. You saw strain, anger, arrogance, cunning. Psychologically, he was like an animal at bay, crouching, ready to spring. There was fear, fatigue, and anger. He came from some ancient caste of India, he is referring to the Brahmin caste, and was very proud of it. He somehow managed to carry over the particular arrogance of this background into Western surroundings and clothes. His trousers were rolled up, and he shuffled in his carpet slippers. The eye was hard, and the voice was inclined to whine. It conveyed the subtlest inflections of flattery or threat according to who you were or what he wanted of you at the time. He treated you to a repertoire of fixed attitudes of mind and body, and you knew you were expected to respond in a certain way. His whole being was hardened and brittle. You could not talk to him about anything without his getting angry. He was a most frustrated man. On occasion, perhaps when he had had a couple of drinks, his attitude would become confidential and sentimental. He must have been quite nice when he was young. People said he played jokes, but even those were a bit strange. There was in them something cruel, nagging, and bullying. This picture of a man was hardness, coldness, calculation, cruelty, and bitterness. One also saw that he had suffered much himself. It was as if he now bore the marks of all his own aggressions. The eye that once flashed black, the eyes that once flashed black were now gray and lifeless. He was a broken man and managed to convey quite clearly that it was your fault. How has all this happened? Was it his fault or yours? Was it the environment or was the seed of corruption already there? What went wrong? Was it his high hopes that could not be realized? Very few people ever had so much opportunity, encouragement, education, and freedom. He was a first-rate lawyer, and he had been to Cambridge and so on in England. He had opportunity, encouragement, education, and freedom. He had not wanted to be second to anybody. Now he was behind everybody. What had happened? How we waste our life. We do make mistakes, tell lies, get angry, run after women. But this doesn't destroy us. We can change these things, and we should, and we do. But this man was irredeemable. What had gone wrong? Now he gives his own analysis. We destroy ourselves by our moods, our elation, our deep depression. We are too proud to examine ourselves or to let others examine us. We resist criticism. We cut ourselves off from any relationship that might open the door to our own mind and heart. We become so cunning in our resistance that it gets better with age. We manage to make everything someone else's fault. We pick on someone else's faults to mask our own. We become deeply suspicious, and every remark, every action has a double meaning. One grows more and more secretive, lonely, isolated. Could all this have been prevented? Who is to prevent it? The world, or me, or you? Can I prevent my own destruction? Can I not destroy myself? When I don't destroy myself, I don't destroy another. How can I stop decline in myself? This wave of degeneration is always upon me. There isn't a moment of respite. How is this to be stopped? Does one ever ask this question? Or does one only ask it when the bell has already tolled? Then, of course, it is too late. When is the moment to ask this question? The irredeemable cannot ask this question. He can confess, propitiate all the gods imaginable, and make amends. Be deeply contrite. But all this is the action of a man who is already dead. It is too late. So one asks oneself, when is the moment to stay the corruption? Is it in youth? When is it too late? Now he answers his own question. It has nothing to do with age, time, or circumstances. It is because we rely on age, time, circumstances, and opportunity that we are destroyed. The dependence is the seed of destruction. We rely on things outside for fulfillment. This fulfillment never comes. This gray man comes instead. We blame the world for this grayness because the world is grey. But it is grey because we, you and I, and everybody have made it so. We are blaming ourselves. I am blaming myself outside for what I am inside. There is only one entity, not two. I am blaming myself, but I don't know. I don't know it. I am responsible for my own ruin. So I am cursing myself, and rightly so, but I don't know it is myself. So what am I to do? The ruin is there screaming at me. It seems to have come from outside, but the outside is made by the inside and is the same. I am the generator of it all. What can I do? What can you do? Can you ask this question of yourself and really mean it? When you ask this question, you have the energy and the earnestness. In asking this question, you put all the other circumstances aside: time, age, the world. In this, there is no morbidity, depression, or hope. You are laced with something, you are faced with something enormous. When you are challenged by something so enormous, you have the energy to respond because you are absolutely sure that you are responsible for everything yourself. You stop decaying. You have blamed the world and others. This has taken great energy and ruined you. You stop blaming others. This energy is there now. This concentration of energy is the beginning of the end of decline. This energy is not mine or the world's. It is intelligence. We are totally responsible for what we are and for preventing this decline in ourselves. But if we accept all these subtle ways in which the ego hides itself and use them as excuses for continuing to be egoistic, then that's our own undoing. And we are not able to prevent the decline. That's what he's saying. And he's saying to face this question without giving explanations, without excuses, brings about the energy that is needed to prevent the decline, which is coming from the ego. So I'll end it here and we can have a discussion. This decline and the manifestation of the ego and the use of function to acquire status in life. A cook is as talented as the scientist. He knows how to cook food in a particular way. The scientist knows how to solve his equations. There are two people with different talents, but the world admires the scientist and looks down on the cook. One has to question all this, why we have linked function with status in society, and why we respect the man with status and not the man next door. Thank you. We can discuss what Krishnaji has pointed out so far.
Thank you very much, Professor Krishna, for the lecture. Now I am going to read the first comment and question from a participant. Without realizing the observer is the observed, the thinker is the thought, observation does not begin. So we are caught in a conflictual dualistic state, and all action within it only perpetuates division. What is the way out?
It's one thing to conclude what you have just said. It is not false, but it is not coming out of perception. It's coming from the intellect. One needs to watch this in oneself without objecting to it, without using Krishnamurti as the background and saying it should not be so and so on. Then it would become our own truth that the observer is the observed, not separate from the observed. But so long as that perception doesn't happen and it remains only an idea, does not act on consciousness. You have not transformed, you have not changed, you have just acquired some intellectual property through Krishnamurti. And that is the difficulty and also the beauty of Krishnamurti's teaching. He points out that it's a pathless land. There is a path to coming upon the knowledge of Krishnamurti and those ideas, and also a path to intellectually analyzing those ideas. But ultimately what matters is how you go from the idea of the truth to the perception of the truth. The perception is a sensory phenomenon. It includes all your senses and your being. It's both the mind and the heart. Everything is involved in perception. The intellect is only a fragment, and the fragment cannot transform consciousness. That's how I understand him to be telling us.
So now I will read a comment from Ravi GR. And in case, Professor, you wanted to comment on it, I have been to almost all the KFI centers and I have seen that teachers or people who are in positions of power in KFI, at KFI are as insecure, greedy, attached to power, position, job security as any ordinary man on the street or professor at BHU. So that's the end of the comment.
Your observation is true. You don't become different just because you join a certain organization or society which has noble aims and objectives. You don't become very different just because you decide which wise man to follow. You have to come upon the wisdom, not follow the wise man. You can't follow the wise man without the wisdom. And how does one come upon the wisdom? That is what it means when you say, the Buddha also said that you have to be a light unto yourself. You can't get this light from somebody else or from the book. So to engage in this inquiry, which is called self-knowledge, you have to have sensitivity. You have to rely on perception and not on ideation. Use the intellect only to create the question or sharpen the question, but not to answer the question, because the answer kills the question. And it is important to have the question somewhere in the background of your mind as you're observing, because the question that makes your perception keener, your attention keener, and it requires very keen attention to what is going on actually, which is what is, in order to not delude oneself. That's how I understand him to be saying. So it is the responsibility of the individual, not of the foundation or the society. They can't transform you. You may join them in order to meet other people with similar problems who are also exploring and so on. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's only a function. The Krishnamurti foundations are not spiritual organizations promising you spiritual upliftment. They are functional organizations, making it easy for people to study Krishnamurti. They have places which enable inquirers to come together in a quiet place or retreat so that they can inquire together. Because your problems are not really different from mine, except in a superficial sense. So that is the function of the Krishnamurti Foundation. Just because you join a Krishnamurti group, if you think you have changed, that's an illusion. So you are right that the people in the Krishnamurti circles are no different from other people. And the moment you feel you are different, that is already an ego building up there. To know that you are an ordinary man is to know, at least know that truth. If you have arrived at that truth through perception, it's a big step, because then you know that you don't really know. And unless you become aware that you don't really know, you don't really learn. You're trying to teach others what you know. And that is not a quest for truth. That is just propaganda for your own thoughts and your own beliefs. So it's very subtle, and for understanding what is subtle, one needs to pay a lot of attention without the desire to change something, not in order to change oneself, but simply in order to learn about oneself.
Thank you, Professor. We have one more comment now from Dushitsa. In case you would like to offer your comment. Indeed, some are just simple, ordinary people, far from being like K, yet they make it possible that K remains alive and his teachings are spread. And we all can meet in those enchanting places and inquire together.
Yes, the foundations can only provide you spaces or facilities for your own learning. But it is your responsibility, mine and yours, each individual's responsibility to learn about this. You can't get this learning from somebody else. You've already said that, so I'll end it here.
And next, I would like to read a question from Catherine Jones. There is a saying that the ego is a good servant but a bad master. Why can't we just perceive the ego as a servant to the higher self?
One has to ask this question of oneself. Where does the self end and the other begin? Or is it all through all my thinking, all my relationships, everywhere, it is the self that is operating, which means self-interest is operating. There may be a role for the self, a very limited role, to look after this body and to provide it food and shelter and a sense of physical security. The brain needs that. And that's the responsibility of the consciousness. And we call it self because it is doing something for what we say is the self, is identified with the body and the mind. So there is a certain amount of responsibility there. But that responsibility is denied if you identify with this thing called the self. The self is that conditioning, the particular culture in which you grew up, the attachment to your family and all that. We have talked about it. It has a role of protecting you. But if all the time I am obsessed with that and only concerned about the profit of the me and the mind, then I'm not interested in the truth. I'm interested in the pleasures of me and the mind, the wealth of the me and the mind, the prosperity of the me and the mind, and so on. That becomes the ego. The quest is not for truth, but for profit. Then you're not different from the businessman whose job, whose aim is to make maximum profit. So one has to go into this in one's own life as to where does the role of the ego end and where does the other begin. Other means the concern for the rest of humanity and nature and everything else. Or is it all the way only the ego? I think that question means you neither blame the ego nor extol it. You are looking at your own relationship with this conditioning that you have, which in a sense is a gift of your childhood. But when you get too attached to it, it becomes obsessive. It becomes a master of you. It dictates what you should be doing, should not be doing. And so it's no longer a tool to be used, but it is using you for its own fulfillment. And that is the deception one has to beware of.
And now we have a reflection that maybe invites your comment, Professor Krishna, from Ravi GR. As a wanderer and cyclist, I am living a life of uncertainty and insecurity on a day-to-day basis. And I do see peace, less conflict and confusion, more clarity, security, and happiness. All this struggle I do take on as an opportunity or as my own destiny. But I don't see total transformation or the ending of seeking for the ultimate change. There is conflict between the timeless here and now and gradual change, idea versus reality. Professor Krishna, you're muted somehow.
Uh, we can't hear it. Let us see. Okay.
Can you tell me again, because I've lost the
Yeah.
thread?
Yes. So we're able to hear you now. For some reason, for a while, we could not hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, but what was the question I was answering?
Okay. So, Professor, I can read the reflection again.
Yeah.
Okay. It says from Ravi, as a wanderer and cyclist, I am living a life of uncertainty and insecurity on a day-to-day basis. And I do see peace, less conflict and confusion, more clarity, security, and happiness. All this struggle I do take on as an opportunity or my own destiny. But I don't see total transformation or the ending of seeking for the ultimate change. There is conflict between the timeless here and now and gradual change, idea versus reality.
Krishnamurti has denied gradual change because in the time that you think is required to bring about this change, more complications are happening, more experiences are happening, more conditioning is building up. What is needed is intense perception, not time. Time brings more experience, and one is talking about freedom from experience, not the collection of more experience. Wisdom is not the collection of more experience or more knowledge. So time has a role in the field of knowledge and ideas and so on. We do keep on adding to our knowledge and our experience, but that doesn't bring wisdom. It is the perception, which is the insight, which brings wisdom. And that's a creative happening because that's not the product of thought. And what is not a product of thought cannot be described. The process of it cannot be described. But the human consciousness is capable of such a perception beyond the known. If it is not too attached to the known, if it is too attached to the known, which is what the ego is, then that blocks all perception. And the truth is to perceive what is without any distortion. The distortion comes from your own past, your ideas, your beliefs, and so on. Now, coming to the bicycling, at that time, the concern is mainly physical security. You want to avoid accident, you want to avoid storms, and so on, any kind of danger to your physical being. That is body intelligence. What you are experiencing is body intelligence. It tells you not to court danger. The problem is deeper with psychological insecurity. When the me feels insecure, because the me and the mind is threatened, not just the body, but the entire me and the mind, which is my religion, my family, my knowledge, my happiness, my peace, etc. And when you are seeking psychological security, That is the complication. Not physical security. Physical security is required. The brain and the body need to be physically secure. That's a small part. This psychological insecurity that my wife might leave me, my children might betray me, I may not achieve what my religion tells me, etc. This whole process of desire, of becoming, that won't go away by bicycling. That requires self-knowledge. First of all, the understanding of the problem at the deeper level, and the freedom from your own ideas and your own past conclusions and so on. Freedom is not absence of that conditioning or that knowledge, but the fact that that knowledge or that learning does not block you. It does not dominate in your consciousness.
Have we lost Professor Krishna?
Yeah, it looks like we have temporarily lost him. Let's give a few moments. Yeah, he's logged out and then he will rejoin. Oh, I see. There you go.
Okay. You can hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. The electricity went off here for a few minutes. So that was the reason for the break. Again, I have lost the thread of what I was saying, but maybe it was finished.
Possibly. So I think so. So maybe I will read the next question now. The next question is from K.H. Rasban. Whenever I read Rumi, it reminds me of Krishnamurti. In fact, I understand Rumi's poems better after reading K. I am interested to ask Professor Krishna if he has observed the similarities of K's teachings to Rumi.
See, all sages, if they have come upon the truth, have come upon the same perceptions, because the truth is not different from one person to another. The manner in which they express those truths in order to communicate them can be different. There are some who use logic. There are others who use poetry. There are yet others who use parables and stories to communicate the deeper truths. And in an ultimate sense, the deeper truth is not communicable through
I think we lost Professor Krishna again.
Jesus or Buddha
Okay,
talking
he's
about.
back.
So this comparing one teacher's teachings with that of another
Okay. We'll wait for a few more minutes.
We can't hear you, Professor Krishna.
Yeah, he's back again. I'm still mute.
I was explaining what happened. You see, when electricity goes off, even for a minute or two, the generator comes on. The Krishnamurti Foundation's generator comes on to provide electricity. But there is a gap between the two. And when the power comes from the city, again there is a gap because the generator gets switched off and the main power comes on. So that we have brief interruptions like that. That is because the electricity keeps going out and coming in. This will become more frequent when we have rains and so on. Right now, it's not so, it's unusual. We have not had these interruptions in the previous talks, but today there are some storms developing in the environment. So again, I've lost my thread. So can Krasimir help me?
Absolutely. I will repeat the question. Whenever I read Rumi, it reminds me of Krishnamurti. In fact, I understand Rumi's poems better after reading K. Would you mind sharing with us if you have observed the similarities of K's teachings and Rumi?
Yeah, I was saying that all sages who have come upon the truth have come upon the same perceptions because the truth is not different for different people. But the manner in which they then communicate that truth can be very different. Someone just doesn't communicate, keeps silent. There are others who use reason to communicate their perception. Yet others use poetry or art to communicate what they have seen. And some use stories and parables to pose the question. But ultimately, all these can only pose the question in our mind. And the question is a jewel because that directs you into the inquiry. But ultimately, the inquiry is not just an intellectual inquiry. It has to come to the level of perception. And that is our responsibility. That the Guru or the Rumi or Krishnamurti cannot ensure that. It's up to us. Doing it intellectually is easy. Every professor of philosophy in every university can explain to you the teachings of any of the teachers because that's their job to explain. And it's not incorrect, but it is incomplete because it is not sensory. It is only intellectual, and the intellect is just a fragment of our being. The perception of the truth or the insight is something which requires the mind and the heart and the senses all together for the perception to be holistic. That requires sensitivity. We have talked about it, that sensitivity is not something you can learn through lectures or it comes from contact. So all that is why it has to be each individual's responsibility to clear his vision and to see what is without any distortion. But the what is not different for me and for you. It's the same.
We now have a question from Urmi Kapti. Namaskar. How to deal with such a gray man who happens to be your old friend and who has helped you in some difficulty, but continues to be an atrocious person?
You can only help someone who is willing to be helped. You can't force the help on another. So the first requirement is that he is willing to learn, that he has the humility to know that he does not know, and therefore wants your advice. You can't put this advice, your advice, force it on to other people. Otherwise it becomes propaganda. And propaganda is a useless thing. So that's the difficulty of this quest. But it is necessary for us to deal with.
So now, Professor, I will read a question from Shri Vipra. What is the fundamental difference between perception and sensation?
Sensation is part of perception, but not the whole of perception. Perception of truth is a holistic process that includes the mind, the heart, the senses, the body, everything. That energy is not divided into intellectual and emotional and spiritual and so on. It is a holistic energy energizing all the aspects of the human body and consciousness. That's how I understand the difference between a holistic perception and a partial perception.
The next question is from Dakshinamurti. Dear Professor, Kay says that knowledge and ignorance go together. Therefore, knowledge is never complete. But it appears there is a deeper ignorance of not knowing what one is. Can you please comment on this?
You see, knowledge is something one can add to. In all fields, research is being done to continuously add to the knowledge. The very fact that you can add to the knowledge means that the previous knowledge was not complete. If it was complete, there is no such thing as research to be done. So knowledge is like an area. It's a larger and larger circle increases the area, but it also increases the circumference of the circle. And beyond the circle is the unknown. So your awareness of the unknown also increases along with the awareness of the known. If you depend too much on the known and you are attached to the known, you are not interested in the unknown. The researcher is constantly struggling with the unknown. He's trying to bring new knowledge from the unknown into the known. So knowledge is never complete because it is something you can add to. Perception is not like that. Perception is, if you have perception, that perception itself is the action. There is no separate action required to transform consciousness. Because separate action would mean the act of will, and that would be the act of the ego, trying to achieve something. And you are seeking freedom from the ego, you can't come to it through the ego process. So in this field, perception is all. If you say, after perception, I will act, it means you are relying on the ego, the will, for achieving an end. And that sustains the ego. So you can't come to freedom from the ego through an ego process.
We now have a question from Chandra. What is the difference between psychological emptiness and spaciousness? How do you discern that?
I don't fully understand the question, because are you talking of space in the mind or are you talking about physical space? Physical space is needed for me to function, and that's a physical need. If there are too many people crowding into one room, you don't have enough physical space to operate. In the same way, if there are too many thoughts collecting together in the mind, there is no space in the mind. It is just choosing which thought to narrate. So a crowded mind is an ignorant mind. It won't have a perception. So you need a silent mind. Silent mind is one which is not reacting from within. Your reaction destroys the silence. If you are not reacting, but only seeing, then the silence is not destroyed. But it is your opinion about what you are seeing that destroys your silence, because that's a reaction from your past, from your condition. So it's all very subtle, and one has to pay a lot of attention before it becomes clear to the mind.
And Professor, we have a little more information about the question. Maybe I will reread the question first, and then I will read the additional information. So the original question is, what is the difference between psychological emptiness and spaciousness? And here is the additional information. Psychological emptiness, as I understand, as a void that one tries to fill with experiences, knowledge, beliefs, and relationships. This emptiness is uncomfortable, while spaciousness, immense energy as Kay calls it, is the silence between the thoughts and no self-centered activity.
Yes, what you have stated is intellectually true. Now realize it for yourself.
And next we have a follow-up to the original question by Catherine Jones. The original question was, I think the follow-up is as a result of the answer. The original question was, there is a saying that the ego is a good servant but a bad master. Why can't we just perceive the ego as a servant to the higher self? And now the follow-up is, I meant self, not the ego identified self. So I meant self with a capital S, not the ego identified self.
Krishnamurti doesn't use the word self with a capital S. He uses the word awareness. I think what sages have said in scriptures with a capital S is the same as what Krishnamurti calls awareness. Because awareness is not a thought process, it is not conditioned. It is just this ability to perceive what is. It's confused by the reaction from the memory, which contains the conditioning and so on. If that interference from memory is not there, then that perception reveals the truth. That's how I understand it. But there is no method for silencing this process of the memory creating reactions in the consciousness and distorting perception. There is no method. But if you realize the danger of this, maybe it ceases. That's how I understand it. So that itself also needs to be perceived, that this constant reaction from the conditioning is interfering with your learning. You're not able to learn because of this. And if you're eager to learn, it can stop. That means, if I may use an example, you use thought like a tool. A screwdriver lies in your drawer. You pick it up only when you want to open a screw. But all the time it is not dominating in your consciousness. It's lying in the drawer when you don't need it. Can we use thought in that way? Is the question. Can we use it like the screwdriver? Use it when you have to catch a train, but don't let it dictate to you what you are doing or what you should be doing and all that. So you have to put thought in its right place, not say thought is bad, thought is evil, and those are all conclusions. To understand this, what thought can do and what is healthy and what thought cannot do and what thought interferes and prevents, all that is part of self-knowledge. That comes from observing the role of thought in one's own consciousness. Of course, all observation needs to be completely honest and with a view to learn, not with a view to confirm one's previous conclusions.
We now have a question from Chandra. Is fear dissolved completely in observation, or does it always return in some new form?
If you are not free from fear, it will return. If you are free from fear, it will not return. So the important thing is, how does one free oneself from fear? For that, you have to understand what causes fear. So long as that cause is present, the fear is not going to go away. It's an effect. So if you are attached to your property, there is the fear of losing it. So if you learn that attachment brings fear, then you have to look at attachment and why you are attached. So it's not so simple. You can't just decide about it. It has to come through perception.
Now we have one more question from Chandra. Krishnamurti spoke about decline as becoming mechanical. 2 questions. Number 1, how does one catch the beginning of that in oneself? And number 2, how does one bring choiceless awareness, especially when the mind is dull, reactive, or fatigued?
One is mechanical when one is doing things habitually. Habit means that you are not aware, you are just acting mechanically. So one has to free oneself of habit and do things with awareness. The Dalai Lama and so on call that mindfulness. When you are sitting down, you are mindful of your sitting. When you are eating, you are mindful that you are eating. The taste of what you are eating also. And when you are seeing, you are mindful that you are seeing, and so on. So the mind is fully there in the present with what you are doing. That's mindfulness. And that is also awareness in the present. Awareness may have a somewhat deeper significance because it may be more holistic than mindfulness. Mindfulness is a starting point of awareness. They ask you to be aware of your body reactions and what your body is doing and so on, as an exercise for coming upon deeper and more expansive awareness. Ultimately, it has to include what is going on within your consciousness, within the mind.
So now I would like to turn it over back to Professor Krishna, Donna, and Prasad, because it looks like we are nearing the end of our allotted time for today's lecture.
Thank you. I think I'll just repeat the fact that we'll go to the next 5 chapters. And the last one in that is about education. And it comes to the second section in the book. But I think that it is good to complete the first section and then move on to the second section. So we'll take that up next time. So please read up the 5 chapters, and Prasad will probably write to you the titles of those chapters. And we shall discuss them next Sunday. Sunday for Indians and Saturday for Californians.
Thank you for Professor Krishna. Thank you to everybody for being here today, and we'll see you next Saturday.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Professor Krishna.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Krishna.
Thank you.